Let's talk to Nigel now. Nigel, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Lots of things for us to discuss this morning, Nigel. Not least, I was very interested in your take on the shutting down of the old borders to people coming here from foreign countries. Because my first thought when it was announced in the House of Commons by Matt Hancock was, what happens if you're coming in on a dinghy from across the channel? And I immediately thought of you, because I assume that's still happening.
Well, there's a very easy answer to that. If you come in via dinghy, you still get to go to a hotel, but you don't get charged.
Right, and you don't have to make the reservation yourself, presumably.
No, but I don't think you even have to prove a COVID test within 72 hours either. And of course, the astonishing thing is, Mike, that what the government have now done is to offer an amnesty to the 1.3 million people they estimate to be here illegally.
Right.
So it's a pretty raw deal if you come legally, but if you come illegally, you're okay.
Well, I was on Sebastian Gorka's show last week, and I said to him, basically what this government has now done is criminalised people who have gone away on holiday, who are British citizens, and decriminalised people who have come here illegally from foreign countries who are foreign nationals. It's quite a bizarre kind of juxtaposition, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. But of course, when it comes to illegal migration into Britain, they don't want to talk about it. You know, I mean, this is a subject that I've pushed incredibly hard over the last year, as you know, and I regularly urge people to write to their MPs to say something must be done. And, you know, in most cases, the letters from constituents simply get ignored. And, you know, when you think, as I say, it's 1.3 million people that we estimate are here illegally, it's a very real issue costing a vast amount of money. And who knows what coronavirus risk those coming across the channel pose.
Well, exactly right. I mean, quite frankly, Nigel, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't know about this story at all. I don't think there's any point in pretending that that's not the case. Because I had a campaign going as well where I was getting people, listeners, to write to their MPs asking at what point in the constituency in which they lived were people being moved into hotels, and where, you know, who was in charge of it, how many Serco operations were there going on. And I would say that you could count on the fingers of one hand any MP that actually gave an honest answer.
Yeah, that's right. They don't want to know. They want to brush it under the carpet. And interestingly, mainstream media were, I was going to say in the same boat, but that's a bad pun, I get that. But they didn't want to talk about it. I mean, there I was last May, out in the English Channel, you know, filming this stuff going on. And the BBC, Sky and others didn't even want to touch the story.
I know, absolutely staggering. Let's talk a little bit about the lockdown, because more and more now we're seeing scientists even actually saying we should be lifting the lockdown. Schools can be opened. We can start reopening shops. We have to get this economy back running and cooking, don't we?
Yeah, and I mean, full marks to Charles Walker, the MP, who has really spoken out very passionately and very eloquently about this by saying, look, we were told that once we had a vaccination program, life could start to return to normal. And all we're being told is at some point next week, the Prime Minister will tell us something. And, you know, we're living at the moment with rumours, facts that are being contradicted. But I mean, if they're serious in saying that we can't fully ease until the infection rate is below 1,000 a day, I begin to ask myself, Mike, what happens next year when there's a flu outbreak? Do we go back into lockdown? I mean, have we permanently changed our attitude towards risk in this country? I'm not for a minute denying that for a small percentage of people, this virus is very serious. And I do know several people who've died with it. All right.
Yeah.
But the sheer amount of damage that is being done. I was talking again last night to the local Kent diabetes groups. You know, we're just not screening people. So what the longer term implications are for cancer, heart disease, strokes, diabetes sufferers, you know, we are building up a medical time bomb with our current attitude.
Yeah. I had a very interesting tweet today from a listener who said that he's had his letter from the doctor to say, please come in and get your COVID vaccination. He's been waiting a year for an operation, which he actually needs. And he says he can't get that organised, but they can organise a vaccine for him, which he says he doesn't necessarily need because he's already had COVID.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is this whole point, isn't there, that, you know, about 20% of the population now do have antibodies. But look, you know, praise where it's due. I think you and I have been very critical of this government over the course of the last year, and with good reason. But isn't it interesting that when it came to the vaccine program, they appointed this woman, Kate Bingham, who came in from private equity, and from what I can see, has not only done a fantastic job, but has also absolutely justified Brexit 100%. So at least there's some good news out
Absolutely right. I mean, I suggested, not entirely tongue-in-cheek the other day, maybe they should put her in charge of the Home Office.
Well, anything that will bring about a change of culture in our quangos and our civil service would be very welcome indeed.
It would indeed. Let's cast our eyes across the Atlantic. As we would have predicted, and as we probably both did predict, Donald Trump was acquitted yet again. So rather than now being called by Adam Bolton and his like, the only president who's been impeached twice, he's actually the only president who's been unimpeached twice.
Yeah, I thought what was very interesting was there was a lot of criticism of Trump's legal team. We were told that he had the B team representing him. I watched their summing up in the Senate, where they showed that in the impeachment process, the Democrats had doctored the speech that he'd made on the 6th
Quite
of January.
Extraordinary, that.
Where he said very clearly, march peacefully, where he said, if we have to get our own back, we'll do it in the primaries, i.e., we'll do it democratically. They then produced a tweet as evidence of this great plot to sack the Capitol that actually they showed was from 2020,
yes,
not from 2021.
Yeah, I mean, and they edited it. I mean, surely that's in this country would be contempt of court. You'd be locked up for it, wouldn't you?
It really was astonishing, the lengths to which they went. But the problem here is that the left or the hard left, are so motivated by hatred, so motivated by their sense of moral superiority, that they believe they're better than those that are on the right, that they're prepared to cheat and lie to go about achieving their aims. And so I thought in the end, it was quite right that he was acquitted. And I think what is now fascinating is the Democrat base are more firmly behind Donald Trump than they ever were. You've seen Fox News, the great Fox News, who've become very critical of Trump, are losing viewers in very, very significant numbers. And what Trump is planning now is to get a lot of people like Mitt Romney, who has now voted twice to have him impeached, to get Mitt Romney removed as a candidate the next time he runs for the Senate. And I think all the British newspapers who sort of say, well, what the Republican Party need is Trumpism without Trump, don't get the point that whatever his faults are, whatever his excesses may be, this is the only guy that can actually unite the Republican base, keep working class support for the Republican Party, and crucially, keep that big black and Hispanic vote, which he and he alone has built up. So I was talking last night to somebody who'd been with him yesterday, and he is on great form. He's not retiring. He's not going to play golf every day. He fully intends to have a tilt at this in 2024.
Yeah, interesting times. It's going to be fascinating. And also, of course, Joe Biden has not quite set the heather alight, has he, with his new presidency in the way that everybody seemed to think that he would. And in fact, there was even a Black Lives Matter protest that got violent in New York just last week. So plus ça change, I think you would say, wouldn't you?
Well, I actually think that Black Lives Matter and Antifa are likely to behave even worse under a Biden presidency than they did under a Trump presidency, because they'll see a president that has to try and keep his party together. And his problem is he's got the sort of the AOC group, the squad, who were there within the House of Representatives, and he's got to keep them on board. So I think what you'll see is Biden being forced to appease BLM and Antifa. And of course, as we well know, if you appease bad people, they just come back and ask for more.
Exactly right. And Nancy Pelosi's a bit of a loose cannon as well, because she's raging at her second failure to clip the wings of President Trump. And she's going to be looking for some kind of payback from somebody, and she probably won't care who it's from.
Well, I think very interesting, isn't it, that Nancy Pelosi, so outspoken of the Trump rally on the 6th of January, and yet when dozens of American cities were on fire last year with these protests, she actually sought to justify the actions. And that's what you've got. There is not a level playing field here. There are extremes on the hard left and extremes on the hard right, and they're both as bad as each other. But people like Pelosi can't even bring themselves to say that. And her definition of far right is, of course, where much of middle America really is.
Yes. Now, it might come as a surprise to you, Nigel. I don't know whether you saw the piece yesterday. The New York Times wrote a big piece yesterday about, the march of the sort of the right-wing broadcasters. And we were named as Talk Radio in London as the sort of Rush Limbaugh of Britain. And incredibly, last night, the news comes in that Rush Limbaugh had passed away. I mean, you were familiar with him. And many
Yes.
people who are into radio are, but not everybody in this country has heard of him. He was quite a character, wasn't he?
He was. I mean, he really kicked off in 1988 with a daily talk show. I was hooked into Rush Limbaugh in about 1990. He was outspoken. He was also very, very humorous.
Yeah.
And you could never quite tell, whether he was just taking the mickey a little bit or whether he meant it. But he became a voice for conservative America at a time when the Republican Party had become rather like the Conservative Party in Britain under David Cameron, a sort of a mush in the middle. And Limbaugh was there as a voice, and he built that radio show up to 20 million listeners every single day. He is the biggest ever talk radio show host in US history. He's probably the biggest there'll ever be. And I was very pleased. I was actually in the chamber for the State of the Union speech last year, when Melania placed the Congressional Medal of Honor around his neck. And so he died, he wasn't very old, 70, died of lung cancer, but there's no doubt that Trump would have struggled to have won the nomination had it not been for people like Rush Limbaugh, who'd been there for years and years and years, busy making the arguments and absorbing the hatred of mainstream media.
Yes.
And did that incredibly well.
Well, if you think about that, you're describing a guy who kind of came to prominence throughout the period of Clinton and Obama, right? So you really were kind of seeing him. He was the real alternative. He was the real opposition to them.
Yes, and I mean, during those years, the Republicans were led by people like Romney, and the Bushes.
Yeah.
And Trumpism has absolutely triumphed within the Republican Party, just as Euroscepticism has now triumphed in the British Conservative Party.
Absolutely right. Now let's talk a little bit about Reform UK. Obviously, you are the party that has proposed that lockdown was not as necessary as it has been. What are your plans coming up? You've got the May elections looming.
Yeah.
What's the latest?
well, look, I get slightly annoyed at lazy journalists saying that Reform UK has been formed as an anti-lockdown party. It has not. When we launched the Brexit Party, the slogan was change politics for good. That we thought that Brexit was the first step to a necessary set of reforms to bring our country into the 21st century. And that means things like getting rid of the BBC licence fee. Yeah. It means things like reining in the Quangos, the civil servants. It means things like saying that a House of Lords stuffed with hundreds of Tony Blair, David Cameron, and now, of course, Boris Johnson's friends, is completely unfit for purpose in the 21st century. So it is a radical reform agenda. And part of that is the way the government has handled the coronavirus crisis, the extent to which, the small guy, the small woman, the sole trader, the small business, in many cases are going to the wall, where actually, if you compare, for argument's sake, Florida, which didn't lock down, with California, which did lock down, it almost seems to make no difference. So we're not just anti-lockdown, and that's a very important point to make. When it comes to these elections coming up this year, we have a problem. Firstly, that we're a new party, so you've got to get your message out to the public. But what the government have said is that because of coronavirus, we're not allowed to leaflet door to door. We're not allowed to knock on doors. We're not allowed to street canvass. So we are racking our brains, Mike, right now, as to how we can put together an effective campaign, given that we're being told that effectively we can't do it.
It would be a very cynical man that would suggest that the lockdown rules will be kept in place until then, wouldn't it?
well, it'd be an even more cynical man that would say we'd move to all postal voting. We'd finish
Well,
up
quite.
with,
Maybe
with
that's
half the population, rather like America,
Yeah.
having no confidence in the system.
Well, exactly right. And maybe, though, if we are led to believe that Boris is going to move quicker than we are so far being told, maybe by May there will be things that you can do. Maybe the pubs will be open. Maybe the restaurants will be open. Maybe the shops will all be open, and we'll all be walking around happy as Larry.
What's pubs? I've not heard of these things. What are they?
Yeah, I know. I was talking to my sister the other night. She said, I've just been out for dinner. I said, what does that even mean? I've completely forgotten what it's like, But hopefully, at one point soon, we will be back in one, Nigel, and I shall see you then. Thank you very much indeed. Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK.